Welcome back to Embracing Tradition. Today I want to talk about how Catholic apologetics on YouTube helped me on this journey and helped to convert me to the Catholic faith. As many of you know, if you've watched my conversion story, it was one of my first videos that I posted to YouTube. My journey began with a study of Eastern Orthodoxy. My husband and I were Reformed Presbyterian at the time when I started to really do a deep dive into Eastern Orthodox theology. And in an attempt to help my husband and to kind of bring things to light for him, I was trying to look for Eastern Orthodox apologetics online. And unfortunately, there is a short supply of those. I think it is getting better, as Orthodoxy is growing in the United States. I think they're seeing the need for apologetics. And they are answering some of these questions. But I will say that because we were Reformed Protestants, the Catholic argumentation against what we believed was much stronger and made more sense within the worldview that we were coming from. So I found myself having to go to these sources. When I began my journey into Eastern Orthodoxy, I was still very anti-Catholic. I still had a very Protestant mindset towards Catholicism, and unfortunately, that was fostered by a lot of the Eastern Orthodox things I was reading and things I was watching. But all that to say, by listening to people like Joe Heschmeyer, Keith Nestor, Eric Ibarra, I was finding that their arguments were really good. And not just for the debate within Reformed Protestantism and Catholicism, but also against Eastern Orthodoxy. So they were making the case, for the papal office and everything, and that was convincing enough, but I wasn't convinced of that to begin with. My husband is actually the one who helped me, come to those conclusions. I was still in this mindset of, if it's Catholic, it's wrong because of the schism in 1054. I believed that, that Catholics are the ones who schismed at this point in time. And I was very much under the impression with the East that Catholics don't have sacraments, they're not a true church, they're the ones who departed from the ancient faith. I quickly discovered that just could not be true. In the digital world, where I had the benefit of not being in the 16th century where I have to have a copy of written materials, I was able to just do an instant search, faith alone versus faith and works in Catholic and Protestant perspective. What are the sacraments? We live in an extremely blessed time. We have information at our fingertips. And when I was going through this process, for about 6 months, all I did was consume Catholic apologetics. I needed to combat things like penal substitutionary atonement. I needed to understand the sacraments from a Catholic perspective. I needed to understand all of these core doctrines that the Reformation split with the Catholic Church over in order to bring questions to my husband, to help him think through these things and to help him see kind of that the Catholic Church wasn't what we've been told that it was. And in doing so, it unraveled a lot of my preconceived notions about Catholicism and my misunderstandings, even coming from the Eastern perspective. So it wasn't very long until I came to the conclusion that Eastern Orthodoxy is wrong to say that Catholics don't have sacraments. So that was the first domino to fall for me. I came to understand that there were very real differences within the Great Schism that caused the Great Schism. There were a lot of politics involved, and the claims that the Orthodox side to me just were not convincing. I found the Catholic claims stronger, much stronger. So I started to view the Catholic Church as legitimate. Her sacraments were legitimate, and I was very drawn to their understanding of the Eucharist and transubstantiation and the way that they did apologetics. It seemed much more faithful to the way that Christians have fought for the faith. Now, that is not a knock on Eastern Orthodoxy. I still have a huge affinity for Eastern Orthodox theology, for Eastern Orthodox channels. I really enjoy Lord of Spirits. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And I still understand the atonement a little more on the Eastern side than I do the Catholic side. I haven't really dove as deep as I can into that, just because I don't have a lot of time. I have 5 children. But I still err on the side of the Eastern Orthodox understanding of the atonement. But a lot of these key issues that are different, they're not as different as they seem. Like Eastern Orthodox has theosis, and Catholicism, they have the same thing. We just call it deification, and they're the same concept within salvation. And so for me, I wasn't finding as big of a gap as I was believing beforehand. So today I want to put forth my favorite channels, and my top number one channel that convinced me that Catholicism was true would absolutely have to be Shameless Popery with Joe Heschmeyer. He explains things in a very intelligent manner, but it's on a level that me, a stay-at-home mom of 5, can understand. And I really appreciate the way that he sets forth his arguments. He always brings the receipts. He always has, his information backed up with sources. You can go find them yourselves. You can go read them. And I really appreciate the way that Joe Heschmeyer does his apologetics. Second, I watched a lot of Pints with Aquinas, and he was particularly helpful when I was feeling so alone in my conversion process, because I couldn't tell anybody. My husband was he was employed by our church, so my lips were sealed. I had not a soul to confide in, not a soul to help me through this process, and so I was very much alone. And every time Pints with Aquinas would do a conversion story, I was on it. I was hooked, for the whole 3-hour interviews that he would do. And there's several that I rewatched over and over, especially in times when I just felt so alone. And I felt like as I'm watching these people's conversion stories, I was not alone. There were people who were like me, who had gone through things that were very similar to me. And it was just encouraging. So if that's the boat you're in, if you are in this process and you have a spouse that, is not on board, or if your family is not on board and you're finding pushback from people in your life, that is the channel that helps me the most. I would listen to the conversion story of Dr. Scott Hahn, and there was another woman on there that he did. And I'm going to play some clips for you. Some of my favorite clips that helped in the interviews that helped me. And I'm going to link them in the description after the video. But so for that process, that was my favorite channel to go to. So I'm only giving you my top 2 channels that really helped me the most during this time. But I watched so many channels that were so wonderful and helped me so much. And I'm going to list them. So the top 2 is Shameless Popery, Pints with Aquinas, Keith Nestor's channel, Eric Ibarra's channel, and I will say that James White doing debates against Catholics. Thank you, James White. You really helped me to be convinced of Catholicism. So that's a running joke amongst Catholics who have converted from Reformed Protestantism. They often say James White really helped me convert, and it's so true. And I'm going to play some funny clips from a debate he did with Joe Heschmeyer, and it's just like, yes, I'm so thankful that I'm Catholic. Thank you, James. But yeah, so this is just about the beauty of the time that we live in. Take full advantage. If you're on the fence of being Catholic and you're a Protestant, watch all of these channels. They will answer your questions. I cannot give better advice than that. If you want apologetics, YouTube and some of these channels are the best place you're going to get them. You will find answers to a lot of your questions, if not most of them. And I will say there are channels to avoid, and no, I'm not going to name them by name. No, thank you. But be careful. You have to be careful with your online space and who you listen to and where you're getting your information from. There are Protestant apologetic channels that I would listen to. And while I think they are more generous and kind to to Catholics in general, I found that their information and their sources that they were quoting were often misconstrued and taken out of context. And so if you're a Protestant looking at Protestant channels, always go to the sources. Read them for yourself. The biggest thing for me that converted me was going to the sources that I was being given. And I would read them in context for myself. And I would oftentimes find that either they were saying what the apologists were saying, And I would find that, sometimes it's not exactly how it was presented to you. So be careful with Protestant channels. Be careful with Catholic channels. Sometimes there are not so great Catholics who represent the faith. But there are so many good ones that I only know of a few that maybe I would say watch with caution. There's a lot of schismatic Catholic groups out there. They've broken off from Catholicism. And be careful with those as well. So just like with anything, you have to do your own research. You have to come to these conclusions on your own. But do the research. We live in such a fantastic time where, I can sit down if I wanted to and just watch YouTube all day with nothing but apologetics, which is a lot of what I do just because I'm cleaning the house all day and I usually have my headphones on and, listening and learning and trying to understand both sides. And the reason why I do that, I want to understand both sides. I want to have a good understanding of where both sides are coming from, so that I can do a good job at presenting what I think is wrong within Protestantism and what I think is right about Catholicism. So, did YouTube make me Catholic? I would say it helped abundantly. My husband was the one who finally convinced me, fully. He helped me. We read Joe Heschmeyer's book on the papacy and the Pope, I think it's called Pope Peter. I even read some other sources, like from Eastern Orthodoxy, on the papacy. And I did not find it convincing. I didn't find history to back up the claims that I had been believing from Eastern Orthodox perspective. YouTube softened my heart towards Catholics, towards Catholicism. It helped unravel a lot of preconceived misunderstandings that I had about Catholicism. And it helped me to embrace, they have true sacraments. And so at some point I was like, I would be perfectly fine and happy and overjoyed to be Catholic rather than a Presbyterian. I did have my concerns about the papacy at when my husband started converting. But they weren't so big that they couldn't be overcome. A lot of things that I believed about the papacy could be proven to be false. And so even though at the time we converted, we didn't have the greatest pope in the world. He wasn't the strongest, most traditional pope we could have had. And even with that, I was still convinced that it's not the pope himself, the person, that is convincing. He doesn't have to be the greatest pope to ever live for his office to be legitimate. And so I was just convinced of the office of the papacy, regardless of who is in office. And my husband, I can thank for that one. But as far as being convinced that Catholicism is true, and it contains within it the fullness of Christian truth and doctrine, that I can thank all of my fellow Catholic creators and for helping me in my journey. It was a long 2 years. But, like I said before, in my time of feeling so alone and desperate for the sacraments, I did find comfort there. There's people out there who are like you and who are like me, who went through and are going through this painful process. And I will say it is a painful process. You will lose family. You will lose friends. People will believe things about you and your faith that are not true. And that is also another positive of learning these things. And seeking to understand your faith more deeply and seeking to understand it within the divide between Catholics and Protestants, because you can do a better job at defending what we believe with what we actually believe compared to what Protestants believe. And I know that Protestantism is a huge term. It's kind of undefinable because it's such a big umbrella. But it's all very related. I think that a lot of Protestantism has a lot in common and can be debated on that scale of, generalities. Now, you should understand it based upon your personal experience and who you have to deal with in your life. My particular husband was a Reformed Presbyterian. And so a lot of these channels do tackle apologetics from that angle, which was super, super helpful. And I am thankful for that. But, you can pretty much use these arguments across the board for most of the tenets of Protestantism. All that to say, watch YouTube, yes. deepen your understanding of the faith. Most importantly, I would say you should be praying and seeking counsel from a spiritual guide who you trust in your life. You should probably, if you're on the fence, you should probably visit a mass. You should probably speak to a priest. I didn't have the luxury of doing that because my husband's job was, it could have been jeopardized. But if that had not been my situation, I definitely would have wanted to go to a mass and wanted to speak to a priest and try to get some guidance along this journey. And that is ultimately, I think, the best thing to do if you are on the fence. But let's say you're already converted, you're already a Catholic convert, and you're already, or maybe a cradle Catholic or a revert. Seek to understand your faith better. Utilize, this great gift that we've been given by God, and find good, faithful Catholic creators and learn about your faith. They might just make you a better Catholic. And if you're not a Catholic, they might just make you Catholic.
As to whether Ignatius even existed, I hope Ignatius
Candida Moss and people like that are taking that view, but it is a fringe view in Scotland.
I hope it's becoming the central view. I hope Ignatius existed.
Because delaying obedience to what I know is true is feeling more like disobedience every day. I had written that into my prayer journal. I had practiced the line before dinner. And when it came out, she looked at me and she said, "That's clever." And I thought so too. But she knew I was sincere. I was just being rhetorically sly, or so I thought. So she came to me later that night and she admitted that she had prayed and she knew what she had to do, and that was to let me. And she said, "How long will it be?" Well, it was less than 5 weeks, so much for 5 years. And
it's not just talking about something like the manna, but the true manna is Christ's flesh and blood. The Jews dispute among themselves, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" There's something shocking here. And now, you can say, well, that's the Jews, and it's not clear if those are believers or not. Well, in verse 66, it's really clear. Many of his disciples drew back and no longer went about with him. So this isn't something that's just shocking or strange to those who are casual listeners of Jesus. This is something shocking even to the disciples of Jesus. And so if your Eucharistic beliefs aren't shocking even to other Christians, then they're not what the early Christians believed.
It was like instant, it clicked. It just clicked for all of us. And I think what we really loved about it was this feeling like none of it was there to cater to us at all.
This isn't about you.
It's not about us. There were no screens. There were no colored lights. There was no
hot cups of coffee.
There was a smoke machine,
Sure.
And yeah, it just felt like it fit somehow. It felt like, oh, this is what's going on around the throne for eternity. Mm-hmm. And we just get the privilege to step into it every Sunday and participate in what's already going on. It was wonderful.